Alright, so this video is to go over mostly the combat roles that I've been working on for a while. My mic is not the greatest. It's a little quiet, but I think I adjusted it to where it's not ridiculously quiet. I am using Tabletop Simulator, which is a really good tool, and hopefully whenever we move on to the playtest phase, people who want to playtest it will get it. It's pretty handy. It's more of a physics sandbox than like an actual simulator. It doesn't really enforce the rules, but it's pretty good for testing a whole bunch of stuff. So at the core, I know we discussed D100s and percentiles for a while, but I kind of wanted to do something a little bit different. So what we're doing is we're working with dice pools instead of one dice, or one die rather. So instead of a whole bunch of instead of just one D100 or 2D10 or whatever, we're working with pools of D6s. Now, we could change the actual dice to something different. It could be D12s or whatever, but D6s kind of came up into mind first. So what we're looking at then is we have our stats. Now obviously there's more than just strength or perception, but strength and perception are your main combat stats. The minimum value is 1, the maximum value arbitrarily that I just set was 6. 6 seemed like a good number since we're dealing with 6-sided dice. So for melee, your primary stat for doing damage is strength, and for ranged, it's perception. And it's pretty much a 1-to-1 basis. So if you have strength 5, then you would get 5d6, and if you had 4 perception, you would get 4d6 for melee and range respectively. So, pretty easy. If I, let's say this is me, and this is a bad guy, we're working with hexes, hexes seem good, and I wanted to hit this guy in melee, I'd have to be adjacent to him obviously. So I would just reference my strength, and if I had strength 5, I would get 5d6 for my attack, and I would roll. And then we would consult from there. Pretty easy. Now you can get more dice through different things. Your weapon will also give you additional dice. Some melee weapons give you more dice. Some ranged weapons give you more dice. But at the core, pretty much your primary stat for either melee or range will give you your dice pool. Now as far as how do we interpret this dice roll, first and foremost, we're not adding them together. So we're not going 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 6 plus 5. Each die is considered individually. So if you ever played anything by White Wolf, Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf, Demon, The Fallen, whatever, this will be pretty familiar with you. You count each die separately and you consider them against some sort of target number. Now as far as how we get a target number for combat, it largely depends on what kind of armor the target is wearing. Armor basically has two main statistics to it, and that is evasion, or the difficulty of the hit to target, and absorption, which we'll go over in a second. But lightly armored targets are more difficult to hit than heavily armored targets because they're more evasive. They have more freedom of movement, which makes sense. You know, if you have a Kevlar vest or a flak jacket, you can do cartwheels and combat rolls a lot easier than if you were in heavy armor like a bomb suit. So pretty simply, unarmored and light armored targets are hit on a 4+. So what do I mean by a 4+? Well, if we consider this roll here that I just rolled for a melee attack, 4+ would mean that anything that's a 4 or higher would score a hit. So these 3 dice are automatically out because they're 1s and 2s. These 2 dice over here would score a hit. So I would score 2 hits with this attack because these are 4 or higher. So that's pretty easy to understand. So unarmored and light armored targets are hit on a 4+, medium armored are hit on a 3+, and heavy armor are hit on a 2+. So naturally, if this attack was against a heavy armored target, I would actually score 3 hits because that is a 2. So what is the advantages then if I'm going to be hit more often than why would I ever want to wear heavy armor? The other statistic tied to armor is absorption, which is essentially an overshield for your hit points. Damage is typically applied to your armor's absorption first before it applies to your hit points. So I don't have an exact value on what the absorption value should be, but just as an example, light armor would have something around 5, medium armor would have something like 10, heavy armor would have something like 15. So if we go back to this, for instance, let's say this was against the lightly armored target, so it would be 4 plus. I would score 2 hits. So let's just use these two piles over here. I kind of split them up into red chips and black chips. Just for the sake of interpretation, red chips are your hit points, and black chips are your absorption or your armor. So light armor would have around 5. So in this case, I scored 2 hits. So I would apply 2 damage to armor first. So that's pretty easy. So he went from 5 absorption to 3. Not too difficult to figure out. Now at any point, if all of this absorption would go away through taking damage from sustaining attacks, then he would have no more absorption left. And then now this damage would start to be applied to hit points later on. So, like I said, absorption is more like an overshield for your hit points. And it's applied to armor first rather than hit points. Now, there's only one exception to that rule, and that is with crits, which I probably should have explained. Well, I'm going to explain now, but let's take a roll again against light, 4 plus. So we would have scored 1 hit. Now let's pretend here. Let's change this to a 6. So these 3 dice would be cast off to the side. They didn't hit. So we scored 2 hits here. One of these is a 6. Now naturally rolled 6s are a crit, and by natural I mean that's how the die was rolled. We're not factoring in modifiers or penalties. Crits have the added bonus of being able to bypass armor. So they ignore armor and they apply damage directly to hit points. So in this case, with this result against light armor, which would need a 4 plus to hit, 1 damage would be applied to armor, and 1 damage from the crit would be applied to hit points. So we would have done 1 damage to armor, 1 damage to hit points total. So that's not too hard to figure out, and I figured it'd be a nice little way to separate, or give some sort of benefit to rolling a natural 6. So just to recap again, armor gives you your difficulty to hit, and it also provides a buffer for damage. Heavy armor is easier to hit. Heavy armor is easier to hit than lighter armor, but you get more temporary or overshield hit points, if you really want to call it that. So next we got to go to hit. Now to hit is essentially a global modifier to your dice rolls. So for instance, let's just roll this again. Come up with some numbers. If I had +1 to hit, for instance, it'd be really easy. You can imagine that we add +1 to all these dies. So this 3 becomes a 4, this 5 becomes a 6, this 5 becomes a 6, and these 1s become a 2. So it increases the value of all my dice. Now keep in mind that these 2 5s that I turned to 6s would not count as crits now, obviously, because they weren't natural 6s. You really wouldn't flip your dice over on the table to do that. I mean, you could if you wanted to, but it's just easier to keep in mind. Another way of thinking about it is if I had a +1 to hit, a target that was wearing medium armor, remember medium armor is hit on a 3 plus, there we go, color. And if you remember, medium armor is hit on a 3 plus. If I have a +1 to hit, that actually means that I will hit him on a 2 plus instead. Because here, a 3 or higher will score a hit, but if I have +1 to hit, then a 2 or higher will suffice, because a 2 would get bumped up to a 3 and so on. And conversely, if I had -1 to hit, this 3 plus would become a 4 plus to hit, because a 3 would now get bumped down to a 2, so I would need a 4 or higher. So it's pretty easy and pretty fast to figure out what you need to roll because you have a target number and you basically bump it up or bump it down accordingly. So not too bad. And there's different ways on how to hit affects you. The most notable one is cover. There's low cover and there's high cover. So for the purposes of this demonstration, the black lines or black squigglies or whatever you want to call them are low cover, and the red lines are high cover. Low cover infers a -1 to hit to your attack, and high cover infers a -2 to your attack instead. So we'll go back to this example where I have my green pawn. This is me, and we have this black pawn who is the enemy. So if I were going to take a shot with this against this guy, this would be fine. There wouldn't be any 2-hit penalties or bonuses here. It would just be whatever I roll. But if we put this guy over here with this little bit, like we could say this is like a knee-high wall right here. If I were to attack him, it's pretty simple. I would just draw a line from my piece to his piece. And if that line intersects a piece of cover, which as you can see it does here, that means that shot would be affected by cover. It's pretty simple, pretty fast. And since this is low cover, my attack would have -1 to hit. Same thing if we put this piece over here and I draw a line. As you can see, it intersects with this piece of red cover, which means it would be affected by high cover or a -2 to hit. So if we kind of go over this, then let's say that this is a medium armor target. I would normally hit him on a 3+ if he was just standing out in the open. So 3+, pretty easy. So let's move this guy behind this piece of low cover. This attack's affected by low cover, -1 to hit. So now I need a 4+ to 4+ or higher to hit him. So this 5 would hit, and nothing else would hit. Now this 3 would be fine if he was out in the open, but again, since he's behind cover, I have a -1 to hit. That 3 is technically a 2 if you really want to get, if you want to, like, again, play around and switch the dice around. So that 5 would be the only die that would score a hit on that attack roll. And conversely, if we had this guy over in high cover, it would be a -2 to hit, like I said before. So medium armored 3+, -2 to hit means that I need a 5+ to hit him now. So in this case, I would have scored 2 hits, 5 or higher. One of them was a crit, so 1 damage to armor, 1 damage to hit points. Now, briefly going back to crits really quick, there is only one exception to where a crit will not completely bypass armor and damage hit points, and that is if your target to hit, or the difficulty to hit your target, is 6 or higher. So let's backtrack and say instead that this guy now has light armor. So light armor, as I said before, was a 4 or higher to hit. So a lightly armored target behind low cover would take a 5+ to hit. A lightly armored target behind high cover would take a 6+ to hit. In this case, and let's use the same pool that I just rolled, all of these dice would miss. This 6 would hit. Now because my target was at a 6+, because of cover and his evasion, this would just do 1 point of damage to armor. It would not bypass his armor and go directly into hit points. That is only applied when your difficulty to hit somebody is 6 or higher. If it were 5+, this would be bypass armor to HP. If it was 3+, this would bypass armor to HP. But since this is a 6+ roll, this would just hit armor. So, and I kind of did that so, you know, people with decent evasion or who make use of cover just don't have damage applied to their hit points, and their armor is completely ignored, basically. So it makes good use of cover rewarding, and it also means that if your current difficulty to hit is 6+, then you know that your armor is going to save you all the time, more or less. You're not at risk of getting your hit points directly affected. So pretty easy. Low cover -1 to hit, high cover -2. Now the other main factor is range or range intervals. So for most of the weapons, or actually all the weapons in the game, have a range. for instance, I just have some stuff written down from a playtest I was doing earlier. But this character is equipped with a 5.56 rifle. The range says 6. So range would be in hexes. So if we have this green guy here, we could just count off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he could shoot out to here. Now that's not the maximum range of the rifle. Obviously, that would be kind of silly. What that means is that that's basically the range interval for that weapon. So if we back him up a little bit, and we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's one range interval. But let's say this guy's out here. He's obviously farther than 6. I can still shoot him, but I take a penalty to it. So we'll just count out how many hexes away from me. He's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So he's at 9 hexes. So he would be at 2 range intervals. And the best way to, like I said, range interval is just how much the range is, and then you stage it up from there. So from 1 to 6 hexes for this rifle, because the range is 6, is 1 range interval. 7 to 12 hexes would be 2 range intervals. 13 to 18 hexes would be 3 range intervals. The maximum range on a weapon is 3 range intervals. So just to figure out the maximum range on any weapon, you just take the range value and multiply it by 3. So 5.56 rifle, 6 range, 6 times 3, 18 hexes. But there's penalties for shooting beyond 1 range interval. So from 1 to 6 hexes, I can shoot anybody. There's no penalty or bonus. It's totally fine. But since this guy was like, what, 9, I think? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Since he's at 9 hexes, that would be 2 range intervals out, which would incur a -1 to hit. So if this was a lightly armored target, normally a 4+, it would now be a 5+ to hit him. Now if we put him all the way out here, I'm not sure if I can even hit him, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So now he's 3 range intervals out. Like I said before, with this rifle, since it's 6 hexes, 1 to 6 is 1 range interval, 7 to 12 is 2 range intervals, 13 to 18 is 3. So he's at 13 hexes, that's 3 range intervals, so -2 to hit. So a lightly armored target, 4+, would now be a 6+ to hit. Pretty difficult. And if we go over here, this guy has a shotgun. I just kind of arbitrarily put a range value down. The range on this particular shotgun is 3. So the maximum effective range for this weapon would be 3 times 3, 9 hexes. So half the range of this guy's rifle. So this shooting a target here, 2 hexes, that's fine. That's 1 range interval. Shooting a target here, 1, 2, 3, 4 hexes, 2 range intervals, -1 to hit. Shooting the target out to here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oops, got my tab. 7, there we go. 7 hexes, 3 range intervals, -2 to hit. So those are basically the 2 biggest factors that one has to figure out when they're making a shot. Now, obviously, this stacks with cover. So if we had this target behind a piece of light cover, and we had our dude guy right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll move them back to here then. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9 hexes. That'd be 2 range intervals. So -1 to hit. Plus this shot is affected by cover, -1 to hit, -2 to hit total, simple arithmetic. We'll say he's medium armored, normally a 4+, or sorry, medium armor, normally 3+, he's now a 5+ to hit, because of range and because of cover. And that's pretty much it. And then you would just factor in what my perception was, what my bonus gave, what my weapon gave for a couple bonus dice. I would roll, and I would say I got 1 hit. Directly to armor. There we go. And that's pretty much it. As far as combat goes, it's easy, it's fast, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time or math or table consultation or factoring a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, as far as thrown weapons are considered are concerned, strength also determines how far you can throw things. So for like a grenade, you gain. Everybody can throw something at least 1 hex. So you gain 1 hex per strength for throwing weapons like knives or grenades. So if I had 3 strength, I could throw a grenade 3 hexes. Now I might like arbitrarily add like just an extra 1 on top of that, so everybody can roll 1 plus strength, so it would be like 4. But it's pretty easy to figure out. You just look at it and go, oh, I can throw it 4, I can throw it 5. And throwing weapons like grenades and knives can never be thrown beyond one range interval. So if I had 4 strength, I could definitely throw this grenade up to 4 hexes, but I couldn't throw it beyond that and take a penalty. So my maximum range for throwing shit would be 4 hexes then. Again, not that hard to figure out. Now, this dice pool stuff is easily applied to skill checks. If I wanted to read a book to try to find some clues on a lead, I would say consult my intelligence stat, and let's say that it is a 5. So I would roll 5d6 for essentially a skill check. Any kind of skill check, when we're dealing with the investigation phase, for now I've pegged at just a 4+ for a success. So you would basically have a 50% chance on every die to score a success. We can change that to 5 or 6 later on. It's just a difference between 50% per die to 33% per die. Really just depends on what we want to do. So if I wanted to read a book and my intelligence is 5, I'd roll 5d6 and I would score 1 success. So I probably didn't do too well. Now I could also do something like during the investigative phase, a natural 6 counts as 2 successes and 1 takes away a success. That's more getting into White Wolf territory. So I'm not sure if I want to touch on that or not, but let's say it's 1 success and the DM's like, well, it's not really enough. You didn't really find anything substantial just by reading the book. So skill checks like that during the investigative phase are pretty simple. You just roll dice, count successes, and so on. So that is pretty much the basic combat overview. Again, it's really quick, and that's why I favored it over percentiles, where percentiles I think there's a lot more math. Like I said, I can just set up and I can basically pick out any target and go, oh, this is light cover, my weapon is 6 range, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, so that's -1, light cover -1, he's heavy armor 2+, so I need a 4+ to hit him, and then that's it, and then let's roll dice. That doesn't count, that wasn't there. For this particular roll, I would have scored 4 crits, so that would have been a good roll. And then he would have taken 4 damage to hit points. So that's why I've kind of stuck with the system so far, because it's quick and easy, and I think it's a lot more fun for players to roll a lot more dice than for players to roll 1 dice and either have it be a hit or a miss. So with this, it's very difficult, I would say, to have a roll come up completely empty unless you're rolling against the 6+. So, but it just lends itself to being very, very quick. Even in this situation, like, oh, I'm only 2 hexes away. He's normally 4+ to hit with cover, 5+. Okay. And we scored 1 crit, 2 crits, rolling a lot of crits. So you should definitely have me on your team. I'm trying to think of any other situations where you would have different to hits. To buffs, obviously, like your officer class can inspire you. A lot of the class skills won't give plus to hit in very rare circumstances, and that's only because to hit is very, very powerful. That's because we're using D6s. So again, we might decide to use D10s or D12s where bonuses to hit aren't as potent. But when you're dealing with six-sided dice, bumping up somebody by +1 to hit is pretty potent. So those should be rare. In most instances where I would want an attack to be more potent, I would just give more dice to the pool. So like this special attack allows you to shoot somebody a extra effectiveness, just add 3 more dice to your pool. That's just an example of, just a random skill off my head, instead of just +1 to hit. Pretty strong. So I would rather, it's just easier to add more dice than worry about, is this skill going to allow characters to hit people all the time? Just put more dice in the pool, to be honest. So that's pretty much it. And if you guys have any questions, obviously you know where to find me on the forum. But all of these rules are in the Google Doc. I don't know if you guys have been reading it. I know it's pretty long, but that's pretty much just the gist of it. I think it's simple and I think it's easy comparative to our other options. So let me know what you guys think, and that's pretty much it.